Just a quick heads up, Patrick. I think you might be the most dignified and overqualified person we've ever had on our podcast. I'm just throwing that out there. Welcome to the AI Guys podcast, where we make artificial intelligence easy to understand for everyone. I'm your host, Lee Dixon, and as always, I'm joined by my candidate for official AI representative of the U.S., Rich Swire. How are you doing today, man?
Good, man. Good.
It's going to be a good day. We've actually got another guest coming on, and I'm really excited for this one. So our guest today is a former U.S. Congressman, elected at the age of 29, serving 2 terms, before taking a career path headfirst into solving some of the housing issues in the U.S. through technology partnerships. CEO of TogalAI and CodeComplyAI, Patrick Murphy, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Awesome, man. Yeah, when we, you reached out and we connected and started learning a little bit about what you were doing, I thought it was really interesting. It crosses over into some of the world that Rich and I came from, doing predictive analytics and machine learning and like the real estate mortgage sector and everything like that prior to, starting up with Rhea. So I'd love for you to take a couple minutes, if you'd like, tell us a little bit about the businesses, kind of what that transition was like. Maybe you were just sick of wearing suits, sitting behind desks, so instead you're wearing suits and solving problems elsewhere. But I'd love to kind of hear how you got to where you are.
Yeah, sure. I give you the abridged version. I grew up in a construction family business, like a lot of people in construction. It's sort of a family thing, right? My grandfather was a painter. My dad was a carpenter. Dad actually dropped out of college because he renovated his frat house. He made like 10 grand as a freshman. He's like, oh, crap, I'm rich, So he dropped out of college and started a construction company. But anyway, my brothers and I all grew up in the trades. My first job was a day laborer, pouring concrete, sweeping, on job sites, and ended up working in the office and estimating with my grandfather, and worked in different aspects. College, I did finance and accounting, and I'd get my CPA license working at Deloitte for a bit. And then my friends and family make fun of me, think I drank some bad water, and decided I was going to run for office. And, basically I was just complaining, right? I mean, sure, like a lot of us, complaining about politics and what's happening in our country and what's happening in the world. And, we all have, different sways, but generally speaking, I was 28, 29 years old and was realizing that so many of the issues being discussed, whether it's the debt or unemployment or healthcare, immigration, climate change, all issues going to affect my generation and younger generations, yet we're the least likely to vote or get involved. It's like, what are we doing? Like, we better do something. So one of my best friends sort of challenged me and said, who the hell are you to complain? Do something about it. So anyway, got elected. At the time, I was the youngest member of Congress. And so I was spending a lot of time there thinking about the future of work. And really from a government standpoint, how should the U.S. government be prepared for the future of work in this technical revolution, right, that we're living in right now? And I got exposed to some, really cool, big name leaders and telling me about AI back in 2014 and crypto and the sharing economy, all these things that were happening. And my mind was just, blown. Fast forward, come back to the family construction business. And we've been blessed to be in a great market and now the largest general contractor in Florida. But what I realized, even though the company's big, the processes were still the same. And it's like, holy cow, right? I mean, this is crazy. It hasn't changed. And that's true for the industry. And, a lot of people reference this McKinsey study that was done that basically shows over the last 50 years, there's been a 0% increase in productivity in the industry compared to basically every other industry that's gone up 2x, 3x, 10x. So there's so many, sort of obvious, low-hanging fruit, opportunities in construction to bring efficiency. And the thing I spend most of my time at a 30,000 foot level focused on is how do we help reduce the cost of housing, right? How do we bring more housing opportunities and quality housing that people want to live in and stop just building to a pro forma. And we're short, they say 5 to 6 million houses in our country today, and the problem is growing. So how do we use technology to reduce that cost and get more inventory built?
That's great. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, we've actually haven't done a ton of in the construction world. We came from the real estate finance side with our last venture where we did machine learning and predictive analytics. But I've always been curious on, you talked about like, the flat line of productivity, and, obviously technology is supposed to obviously increase that. And, here we are, obviously in the early ages of AI, which is even more of a compressor of time, if you will, right? This massive multiplier of productivity. So in your mind, look, just maybe even start just with construction, and of course you can talk outside of construction as well, but where do you see that impacting? How does that come into an industry that certainly you obviously have adapted to technology, but it's almost like the more technology we've implemented and installed over the last 20 years, and I agree with the premise, I think it's beyond construction. I don't think technology's really given us that massive boost of productivity that we thought it would. We end up just being kind of data monkeys entering stuff into systems, but they don't really, it's like been asymmetric, right? It hasn't been like this massive lift for a lot of people. Maybe construction's even more so, but I mean, it certainly has made us more maybe efficient and maybe more, organized, right? But at the same time, it's also like, you know, where's the 2, 3, 5x, right?
Yeah, where's that
Of
unlock gonna actually take
yeah, yeah. And now
hold?
AI comes into the picture, and I feel like that was somewhat of a missing piece because it speaks the language of humans, right? It's natural language. So now you can actually maybe impact and maybe take advantage of that technology that we've all implemented for the first time. We can actually integrate it into our, what I would call our day-to-day lives. And construction industry might be one of those industries where a lot of it is just still very much, fluidity, right? It's people talking, it's people connecting, project management, a lot of services, and hard to automate without humans, right? So I don't know. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what do you expect AI to do in this world, and how would it be any different?
Yeah, no, great question. A lot to unpack because there's so many opportunities. Um, in many ways, a lot of people look at construction and I think they sort of misjudge the complexity of it. And that complexity stems from the fact that basically every building you drove by on the way to work today or in your neighborhood is different. Unless you live in a track home community, basically every building is unique and it's a different soil condition, different architect, different engineers, different finished materials, different general contractor and subcontractor, could be built under a different code and regulation because they change every few years as well, even if it's in the same neighborhood. So every set of plans is different. So people compare construction and manufacturing often, and that's not really a good comparison because every time we build, it is different and a completely different set of plans. And it starts with architects who at their core are artists, right? Which is beautiful, right? They want to create these wonderful buildings that are iconic. And it's unique, and there's no standardization in the way they draw things. So when you sort of fast forward to, I'll just give a small example of what our company Toggle is solving. We realized in our in our construction company Coastal that the biggest piece of overhead is estimating, and that's true for most construction companies. And within estimating, the general process is someone comes to a construction company and says, hey, here's a set of plans, what's it cost? In order for the construction company to determine that, they have to quantify all the materials, how much concrete, how much wood, how many windows and doors and drywall and paint and hinges and everything else, right? And as a kid, I used to use a ruler like this, right? And I'd sit there with plans and a scale ruler, and my grandfather, we'd mark it all down a piece of paper. 25 years ago, some softwares came out to use a mouse, but you're still clicking the four corners of every room and doing all the linear counts. And, on any given building, it's 3 to 5 days of work. So our idea in 2019 was, well, gosh, if a human can look at those plans and see the difference in the bedroom, the bathroom, the hallway, whatever, so can machine vision if you train it accordingly. And so that was the premise of the company is let's automate that task and reduce days or weeks of work into mere seconds, allowing the human to focus on the higher value tasks, right? Because there's so much, right, for humans to do that they fall behind on. Why should they be coloring and counting toilets for a living? Like, that's not what they signed up for. So our software, in essence, reduces the biggest piece of overhead. And in order to do that, we've had to build a foundational machine vision model for blueprints, which has never been done. And in order to do that, right, we had to get tens of thousands of plans. We had to train those unique plans manually, right, label them and do that in a very consistent manner, and then build a proprietary machine vision model on top of that to learn how to read plans as just say a 6-year-old would. And now we're processing over about 120,000 plans a day. So flywheel's going, we've got a lot of data coming, it's getting smarter and smarter. And, Rich, to kind of come back to your point there, so much of construction tech has focused on the field, right? What's happening with drones and robots, and people always keep going to the where the construction actually happens. I would argue and push back that it's actually that's that's been the sort of the missing problem, is they're focused on the wrong area in many ways, because they really should be focused on the pre-construction, the planning, right? Because for every job, it's at least 6 months, often 12 to 18 months of planning and prepping that needs to go into it. And you have PDFs that are used, right? These dumb files in essence. You've got a permitting process that also takes 12 to 18 months to happen. You have teams redoing the same process over and over and over. Because when you go to build your new house, you're not going to go to one contractor, you can go to 3 or 4 or 5. Each of those contractors can go to 3 electricians and 4 plumbers and 5 roofers. So on any given job, you've got 100 to 200 people doing the same exact thing, and they don't share a damn thing, right? So the inefficiency is incredible.
Well,
yeah, makes sense.
I was going to say too, and on that, I mean, you see this across multiple industries, right? Like you said, there's a ripple effect that it's not just a one-to-one problem in most cases. And AI can be this magic wand that solves a lot of things, but if you don't understand how far out that ripple potentially goes, you could build something that is solving, for that one-to-one type issue or something inside of the office, but then does not apply outside of that. So it becomes very siloed and maybe doesn't have the lift of something like you're talking about that does take all of these moving parts and kind of at least put them in the same sandbox.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things too, like, and I'd be curious to see if you guys have run into this yet, but like when we're building out, when we're introducing AI into kind of what I would call a human plus tech world, right? Like the classic, the current business, I'll call a modern business, where they have, obviously they're using some sort of SaaS products, they're using CRM systems, they've got their own, maybe, I'm sure you've got a bunch of different systems, spreadsheets, things like that you guys have kind of built out over the last 10, 20 years to run your business. But then you kind of bring in this kind of foreign actor of AI. And I wonder if, especially since you're a provider, but you're also you're on the other side, you were a user as well. How much do you have to re-underwrite your process, and reimagine and rethink, or versus kind of forcing AI to fill in cracks, but almost kind of have to go back to the basics to say, all right, well, now that we have this AI thing, maybe we don't do it the way we used to do it at all. We have to reverse things, maybe mix up some things. Maybe maybe what we used to do last now is kind of done earlier because we can do it at scale with AI. Whereas before we saved it to last because we didn't want to have to hire 20 people to do that. Right. So, I'm curious to see, like, if you guys hit that same, I wouldn't call it a roadblock, but it certainly is a jarring experience when you're deploying AI in a business where you're like, are we forcing AI into an inefficient human process? And how much of that is because we still have to live in a human-based world, or are we kind of like saying, we got to re-underwrite, we have to really kind of break all this out and reimagine what an AI first or an AI native process would look like? I'm curious to see if you guys have run into that at all.
Great question, and I'd break it up into sort of 2 phases. The realistic phase of the next, just say 5 years, understanding the industry and its limitations, and an industry that's not very tech forward and looking for tech on a day-to-day basis. So with that being said, what we've tried to do, and I think the successful AI companies in construction right now are trying to reduce friction and not trying to replace judgment. There's a lot of wisdom, there's a lot of experience in the industry, similar to many other industries, that you can't just go and replace and think humans are going to accept that. But if you can explain to them all these little pain points, right, the death by 1,000 cuts of how AI can improve that workflow, heck yeah, right? Builders want to build, right? They want to see that building go up as fast as possible. They don't want to be dealing with legal and compliance and accounting, and, all this rework. Like, that's the worst part of their job, right? And I mean, there's all sorts of estimates on this, but most average out to around 20 hours of repetitive, wasted, mundane work that folks are doing in construction because of all that. So what we've found, and what I think for the 5-year period, is AI that's removing that friction, fitting into their current workflow. But put like an exclamation point on this, we're the only web-based takeoff tool that has a collaboration feature where people can share plans without having to email them, right? So think of like Google Sheets, right, where you share. So think of the friction when you don't have that. You've got to email these 200, 500-page documents to each other. It takes 2 hours to download it to your hard drive because most competitive services are on-prem software.
Yeah.
Right? And just think of like the friction that goes into that. COVID hits. Now all of a sudden, how do you get to someone's computer if you're working remote? So like, it's just like I'm trying to just explain the world that people are coming from these on-prem software. So you introduce now web-based, tools with AI, and it starts to remove a lot of these friction points. But Rich, to go a step further, I think in a lot of industries there's going to be a lot of compression, and barriers are going to get broken. But I do believe, of course, in Jeevan's paradox, that believes there's going to be more opportunities for people to succeed, and there'll be more construction than ever in 10 or 15 years, not less. So I think it's going to create more jobs. But why do I say that? Because I believe in 5 years from now, if you want to build a new building, a house, a condo, an apartment, a basic building, it's going to be a prompt, and you're going to type in the address, the budget, the style of construction, the use case, and you're going to get a full set of working construction documents, right? Now, I'm not just talking about the design and, people are doing that. Here's the pretty picture. But what's the drywall assembly behind my head, right? What kind of studs are there? Are they 2x4s? Are they aluminum, right? What size gauge? How do you run the, light to the breaker? What's that look like? The mechanical systems, right? All these things get redone on every single job, and it takes engineers to determine how much steel is in this concrete column next to me. AI can do that really good, right? We've got tens of millions of plans in our data set that we can learn from and apply that going forward. So what I'm, getting at, Rich, is when you can start to take the human out of some of those preliminary design processes that often create error and inconsistencies, and have the AI do that, now you can really start to change that workflow and start to see a real compression there of events. And I think that's where you see the big change. I don't think we can do that today, though, right? I don't think the industry is ready, and I don't think the tech is quite there. So
Right.
I look at this in two phases.
Yeah. I think we're seeing the same thing where you're gonna have this heavy ingestion and usage of tools, and then it's going to kind of cross a chasm over to like this agentic world where agents are starting to kind of autonomously do the work that you kind of just mentioned, right? Because there's a human plus tool element is already well established, right? ChatGPT's, Claude, there's, especially in our industry from a software perspective, that's going to be the first major impact. Is like most software will be written by AI, right? In a handful of years. So I mean, even within our company, 95% of the software we build is AI written. And so then we become this kind of human in the loop, right? That's the economy that you're kind of defining there, the human in the loop economy, which is an interesting, for some people, it's not too foreign, right? In the sense of like, if they're used to, like, especially like if you're a manager or you're a CEO or you're a, you're kind of one of those people that, is more delegating and managing teams. That's going to be less jarring for you. But like for somebody who's actually doing the work, right? A builder or somebody who's actually getting their hands dirty, that's a hard thing to wrap your head around. Like, kind of taking the hands off the wheel. It's like the first time that if you own a Tesla, you take your hands off the wheel and go to autonomous driving, right? Like you've seen it on TV, you see people doing it. You certainly, maybe you may or may not trust, Tesla or Elon to get you from A to B, but everybody, there's always that hesitance of like, all right, I guess I'll just let the AI drive, right? But, and I think that's going to be the same jarring challenge of our economy, is going to be where, you have this capability of understanding, okay, well, if I take my hand off the wheel, am I going to be okay, right? And then at what point do I need to put my hand back on the wheel? So you have to re-underwrite all of those components.
Looking at the friction points that you and Rich have just kind of outlined here, I do think as we start to look ahead, the biggest thing we've been talking about is this concept of AI can do so much, but humans tend to want to get in the way, right? And from this management layer, I think people that do come from the world of like understanding how to manage humans are a little bit more AI capable, because they understand like I'm delegating this work out, but a lot of business users don't really see that. So I guess in the construction space and everything that you've been touching on, are there certain things either you guys are working on right now or starting to see on the horizon as like, okay, once we have this ecosystem feeling really good, here are those next areas that have a lot of human friction. If we can remove that piece and have AI step in there, that might be that next plateau.
Great question. And I'm sure like a lot of businesses, I'll start from the coastal construction standpoint first. It's got to be a blend of top-down leadership that supports it. And then I think really where the magic happens is that bottom-up level, the folks closest to those friction points and pain points, and empowering them to come up with the ideas, to make sure they've got the education, the platform, and the tools to start experimenting, and then give them that leeway. And in Toggle, what we've done is I've expressed to our team, if you can find a way to, basically replace your job with an agent, some set of tools, then you're not getting fired. You're getting a promotion and a raise. That's the kind of, I think behavior we need all companies. And it's that, again, top down, bottom up, approach where there's, high level support, but the ideas often are coming from the bottom. I think in industries like construction, that's most true. And again, this is that phase one we were talking about a minute ago, where I think those friction points are going to be solved by and large by agents and automation until we sort of cross this threshold. We start to remove some of the human elements that are creating the friction in the first place, whether that's government approvals, whether that's some of the design process, some of the engineering process that goes into it. That's got to be removed. But that's a real almost paradigm shift in our industry. That's going to take some time.
Yeah, AI guide, or I guess employee guided innovations, right? Like, you don't need to be the technical person in the room anymore to kind of see a problem, understand it from a business user perspective, and then state, here's what we're currently doing manually. Is there any part of that can come off of the plate to, like you said, reduce friction, increase acceleration on how quickly it can get done, or the effectiveness? Because I do think you talked a little bit earlier in the episode about, it's not that manual processes have been necessarily bad. They do take time, and that's okay, but there's still plenty of error that AI somewhat removes when you start to really understand that this is the way it's done every single time. And whether I have more work on my plate today than I did yesterday, or something takes my attention away from some things, ultimately AI can kind of give a more baseline repetitive process every single time. So now that human steps into something that might be closer to the 80% complete mark, and now we feel like, okay, I can take a lot more of this work and, like you said, kind of delegate it or manage it from this perspective, and you'll see an increase in efficiencies all across the board.
Across the board, and people ask us often, "Oh, what's your accuracy?" And it's the wrong question. Right. Generally speaking, most of these AI tools are more accurate. They're faster. We know that, but sure, they're not perfect. Right? There are hallucinations. We get that. But the real question is, can you manage the change, that human change? And that's the toughest thing that we see, is just getting people to change the habits they've been, doing for 20 years or whatever, and now starting to trust the machine. That's the biggest challenge that we see. But once users, what we found, sort of back to the napkin, if they use the tool for a week, 40 hours or so, they're not looking back, right? Adoption like crazy. They love it after that 1 week of use. And then they start to realize, holy cow, I can bid on 10 times, more jobs, or I can focus on a bid and win it because I found a way to, save 10% on it, what we call value engineering. I found better subs or better materials to use, right? The creative human element, tapping into your network, into your creative abilities, right? That judgment, wisdom, all those things that are still human for now, right? Let's allow the humans to really focus on that. And what we found too is it's happier employees, right? Team members are happy because they're not coloring, they're not counting, right? They're doing the creative, interesting things. So I found and read, this is the same basically every industry. Each industry has its own use case, and construction's no different.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, I can't agree more. I think that's exactly, the mantra that we always try to push to our clients and just to the industry as well is, automate with AI, but don't outsource judgment, right? Let the humans do what they're meant to do, right? The critical thinking, and now you're buying them time to actually spend their time doing the stuff that really is where innovation, creativity, and growth foster, right? That's what you want versus the repetitive stuff. And I do agree that there's a certain amount of adoption that has to happen and use. That's the irony, right? That you have to use it in order to adopt, to see the adoption and to see the adoption increase within a company. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. And this is, of course, what's slowing down, I think, quite a bit of the adoption, at least at the enterprise level, of AI, is that it has to kind of, in a weird way, prove itself to be a useful entity, especially agentic AI, because agentic AI is even more invisible than a tool, and a little less malleable in the sense of it's either acting autonomously or it's part of a workflow. So it's going to take time for us to kind of open our doors to letting AI do more and more and more. But there's always that innovation, like what you're doing with. There's always those innovators that are coming in it from an AI native that are going to push behind and force everybody else to kind of get on board, because even if you're a laggard and you're a legacy system or you're a legacy company, you can't, there is a point in time where you're not going to be able to compete just because the efficiencies are so dramatic with AI native companies, right? And you're going to have
The
scenarios
gap is
where,
widening.
yeah, you're going to have to be like, okay, well, it's either adapt or die. And we've seen this all obviously with a lot of technology revolutions, but I think this one is going to have even more impact just because it's layered on top of already this amazing thing that we built called the internet. It's already, on top of a kind of a global marketplace where pretty much anybody and everybody can operate with freedom to come in and compete, even for small little pieces and morsels of economies. And now with AI, literally from somebody from their basement can build an entire company and operate at the same layer of efficacy that a company with 1,000 people could. So it's an exciting point in time. So I definitely think that it's great to hear kind of what you're doing as far as construction, and I think it's people understand that world as being somewhat very human oriented and complex, and there's a lot of moving parts, especially with permitting and government. We've all kind of felt that, whether it's through our own world experience or just heard it tangentially. But I think integrating AI in there and just kind of having that potential um that potential goal on the horizon of, boy, can you imagine if we can automate 30, 40, 50, 60, 70% of this process, from all these different parties that are involved, what that could potentially mean for housing costs, housing availability, the ability to get like fill that gap that you mentioned earlier in the show. So I think that's something that we're also losing is, okay, all this is great. We're talking about AI and all this cool, fantastic stuff, and we're sitting here vibe coding or we're sitting here generating images. But like, what is the pay dirt for society and humankind, if you will? And I do think housing is a really amazing potential, amazing beneficiary of that optimization you're talking about.
And I would agree 100% and say that government is probably one of the best environments as a whole for AI adoption. It's structured, right? It's repeatable. It's data heavy, right? You've got all these rules and processes that are so ripe for AI, right? And this is at all agencies across the board, at the federal, the state, the local level. And I think it'd be a huge miss if in 5 or 10 years government budgets aren't reduced by 50% or more, right? And giving us a much better output, right, for society, and reallocating those dollars to better use cases, right? There'll be a huge miss. And I think it's going to start because you're going to have a mayor somewhere, or, a state, a governor somewhere that forces this. And other states and cities or whatever are going to see that and say, holy cow, right? And then people are going to start to demand it. We'll see how that plays out. But specifically to housing, I mean, this is just such an obvious thing. And I mean, most people have felt the pain some point or another, but on average, it's 9 months to get your plans approved across the country. Some are, over 2 years in San Francisco and other places. And so much of what the, permitter and the plan reviewers are doing are getting sets of plans, and they're looking at basic things. How far is it to the exit? Is it more or less than 300 feet? Well, they've got to draw a line manually today to see if it's more or less than 300 feet. Where are the sprinklers? How many exit signs? What's the capacity? ADA, right? Is there enough room for wheelchair accessibility? And they take out a ruler and they measure this, right? So there's like 300, right, plus rules that they have to do on every single set of plans, on every set of revisions. AI is really good at that. It can do it like in under a second, right? So why do we have humans spending weeks doing this? It's like it's an obvious use case. So but now here we are trying to sell this to governments, and there's resistance. Oh, wait a minute! Like, are you going to take my job? All the other obvious things we hear about. But like, I think we all know in time it's going to work. Like it's an obvious use case for AI that leads to a better output. Where instead of waiting 9 months, you're waiting 9 days to get an approval. Now your carry costs are less. You're getting more things built, right? It's better for all of us, to get more housing.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely, billions, if not trillions of dollars to be saved over time in the efficiencies of this new technology. I think it's just, I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I think people are, obviously the buzz, the AI providers want you to believe it's going to take overnight because they have to keep selling. But, it's going to take time. Humans don't change overnight, but I do think that the next generation will be the biggest beneficiary of this world. That's going to be, like you just mentioned, 50, 60, 70% more efficient. And with that, I think there's always going to be opportunity for economic growth and jobs. I just don't think it's going to be the jobs of the 20th century. I think it's going to be looking forward, who knows what it'll be, but it'll be something completely different. And I think that's exciting because, like you said, who wants to be a paper pusher? Who wants to sit there and draw and put a ruler on a piece of paper, 100 times a day, just to check off another box, right? And I think that's
just for
the
the
most
love of the
exciting.
game, right, Rich?
That's the most exciting thing for me, is that I honestly think this is probably one of the first technologies that I've seen in my lifetime that does have this, I think, glimmer of hope of actually having a positive impact on society. I honestly haven't really seen it in social media is rotten. All these other things that we've invented it's just not been good for society in general. Internet brought us together, but at the same time, probably not in the
Tore us
right way
apart.
because of, all the things are, there's a lot more negative than positive in a lot of cases. But I think AI has this opportunity of like dramatically changing the course of all things, down to the microcosm of people's lives and their meaning of their lives and their jobs. And I think that's exciting. May not be in our world. We still have to kind of put the work in, but I think the next generation is like teed up to do some amazing things. That's exciting.
Yeah. Well, awesome, Patrick. We're gonna have to have you back on. I know, to get maybe more of the government takes on things. I'm sure now that you're out of the world, right, back in the private sector, you can be like, oh, I'm gonna tell you everything. But I do think you kind of hit a really interesting topic there, though, right? That there's so much manual process that again just kind of gets shifted desk to desk. And that if AI could be doing something in the middle to say like, nope, this doesn't need to hit 5 or 7 people's, eyes just to then go down the line. It's really like, oh, this person should be receiving this with this much context and information, and from there make said decision. Knowing that all of these processes in any industry can be like rules and regulations, as we're talking about here in the construction space, like it does eliminate a lot of that gray area. Right. So I would love to, maybe have you back on at some point just to, again, we don't have to get into playing any side of the coin specifically, but I would love to hear kind of that vision of where, if you could wave a magic wand, where you could see the biggest lift from like your time, in the chairs.
I'd love to be back, talk to you about it. I've got 2 friends that I served with in Congress running for governor in different states now. And this is the number one thing I'm talking about. Hey, a really cool bipartisan platform that no one should really object to, right, in this divisive world we're in, is government efficiency. And you've been given the most unbelievable magic wand called AI to solve it, right, and help reduce the debt, to help make your government, in your state or whatever, more efficient. And it's agency by, agency. Anyway, it's a huge opportunity. I hope they listen. I hope all government officials listen, and happy to talk more about it with you all.
Yeah, awesome, man. It's been great. Thanks for coming on. And for everyone listening, thanks again for joining us on this episode. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to stay in touch. Also, check out our Substack for more content, which we link to this episode to continue this discussion. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care, everyone.